Okay, John 18:28. Then the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, they did not enter the palace because they wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" Now, Mark and Matthew say about the same thing, but Luke says this: then the whole assembly rose and led him off to Pilate. So it's kind of like all the Jewish guys are saying, okay, come on, let's go. We're going to take this to Pilate and get something done about this. So the Jews refused to enter the praetorium, which is the Gentile residence. They bring him to the bottom of the stairs. And if they went on the steps, then they would be unclean. So Pilate comes to them. Here's a picture of the temple, the Antonia Fortress. There's the home of Annas and Caiaphas, and there are the southern steps there. You see, that's where we're talking about. So, let's see. This is one of the reasons some scholars say the meal Jesus had with his disciples was not the Passover meal, but just a Holy Week meal. Because the Passover isn't there yet. It hasn't happened yet. Hey, Merlin. Good to see ya. We just started. Come on in. Make yourself at home. This seems to say they would be unclean for Passover, which has not yet happened. This appears to contradict the synoptic Gospels. Like it looks like there might be a conflict between what the Gospels say, which have Jesus eating the Passover meal the night before. There are three possible solutions. One, different Jewish groups may have eaten the Passover meal at different times. Two, the term Passover may be used here to refer to the whole festival of Passover and unleavened bread, which lasted 7 days and included several meals. And three, Jesus may have celebrated the Passover a night early, knowing he was to be crucified the next day. So Pilate defers to the Jews' sensibilities, and he comes out to them. As the scene progresses, notice carefully how the scene moves from outside the praetorium to inside and the back outside several times, because the Jewish leadership is trying to stay out so that they're not unclean for the Passover. Okay? And this is the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. So John says very little about the Jewish phase of Jesus' trial, but he has a lot to say about the Roman trial. So his focus is kind of on what happened with the Romans. Here's the Antonia Fortress. You can see the stairway that goes up into the fortress. So they didn't want to get on that stairway because that would make them unclean, they felt, for Passover. It's possible that John was in the praetorium, the governor's official residence, for this trial because it was early in the morning. The chief priest evidently held a second session of the Sanhedrin after daybreak to give some appearance of legality to what they were doing. You weren't allowed to make those kind of decisions at the dark of night. So this occasion would have been immediately after that, perhaps between 6 to 7 in the morning. Okay? This guy this is a picture of Pontius Pilate. It's not a photo, a rendering of what Pontius Pilate might have looked like. This portrait is from the 1300s, so it's even likely that's not what he looks like. But someone says this is what he looks like, so I'll show it to you. And these are three things we know about Pontius Pilate. He was the 5th prefect of Judea, serving under the Emperor Tiberius from AD 26 to 36. Pilate was an equestrian of the Ponti family and succeeded Valerius Gratus as prefect. Do you understand? Prefect. Do you know what that means? I don't either. The inscription on the Pilate stone discovered at Caesarea Maritima in 1961 validates his historicity. Why do we care that his historicity is validated? These are not imaginary people. Someone didn't just make up this story. These are real people in real places. And we emphasize that so much you probably get sick of it. But how many people think of the scriptures as like a fairy tale or a story? It's just a story. This is more than a story. This is actual historical events. This is what's called a Pilate stone. It was discovered in 1961 during excavations of the theater at Caesarea Maritima. The inscription reads, "To the divine Augusti Tiberium Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judea, has dedicated." And this is a replica of the stone on the site. Can you see in the background those columns? Mm-hmm. That's all that remains of Herod's palace, and which was built and in which Pontius Pilate lived. So that's all that's left, are a couple towers from it.
Didn't they just recently find that stone?
I don't know how recent it was. This says in 1961.
Oh, in 61. Because I thought I had read something on, or saw something online not very long ago that they had found something.
They keep finding stuff, and and every time we try to hook onto it, take pictures of it, because of this idea that people think of the scripture as a story, but it's much more than a story. It's reality. So, in all four gospels, Pilate defends Jesus. Now, should Pilate be the one defending Jesus? The Jews are the one trying to get him, and Pilate is the one defending him. He's acquiescing to Jesus' execution only when a riot is imminent, washing his hands of any responsibility. According to Josephus, Pilate was ordered back to Rome after using excessive force and quelling a Samaritan uprising, arriving in Rome shortly after Tiberius' death on March 16, AD 37. So in other words, he had gotten disciplined for handling something too harshly. So now he's trying to be real careful with this situation. According to the church historian Eusebius, Pilate was exiled to Gaul by Caligula, where he later committed suicide. Oh, poor Pilate. So we're back then to our Gospels. In this section, Luke and John tell us a similar story, but let me read from Luke and then John. Luke 23, verse 1. Then the whole assembly rose and led him off to Pilate, and they began to accuse him, saying, "We have found this man subverting our nation. He opposes payment of taxes to Caesar and claims to be Messiah, a king." Right? They're trying to bring up the things that would make the Romans mad at him, right? If he's saying he's going to be king and he's not willing to pay taxes. And notice this was the whole assembly. So that would be the whole body of the Sanhedrin, because they were the ones that had met at dawn and heard his case. So the Roman governor had his main headquarters in Caesarea, but he was in Jerusalem during the Passover to prevent trouble from the large number of Jews that assembled for the occasion. And then in verse 2, they were subverting the nation. Large crowds followed Jesus, and the fear was that this would appear to Rome as insurrection. Jesus claimed to be the Messiah, but not a political or military king, the kind Rome would be anxious to eliminate. So that's the problem for Pilate. He sees that. He sees that this guy's not causing trouble among just the people. This trouble is among the Jews, who tend to get a little irritated. So John tells the same section, but he adds a little more to it. John 18, verse 30. "If he were not a criminal," they replied, "we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." Oh, that's a good idea, right? You say he's broken your law, then go do whatever it is for your law, and that's off of Pilate's hands. "But we have no right to execute anyone," they objected. This took place to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die. So they were trying to get him to do it because he could execute them, and they didn't have the authority to do that. In verse 31, in other words, no Roman charge, no Roman trial, no right to execute. They were looking for an execution, not a fair trial. Sometimes Jews undertook what seemed to be mob action, but normally the Romans retained the right to inflict the death penalty. Notice it says normally, because things would happen, willy-nilly. That's probably why Pilate got in trouble, and that's probably why he's being careful this time with this situation. I think it's interesting that we often blame the Romans for crucifying Jesus. But can we not see clearly that it was not the Romans that did this? I mean, they did it, but...
Jews.
So whose side are we on?
Jesus.
Good answer. Would we be considered Jews? We are the Christian. We are Christian people. We believe in the gospel.
We're not Jews.
Are we religious leaders? We have our rules. We have things we'll accept and not accept. What was the problem with what the Jews were doing? They were religious leaders, religious people. What was wrong with what they were doing?
Oh, they're breaking their own commandments, number one. They're gonna be devious about it and get somebody else to do their very good thing.
Manipulate it. Do we see that happening in any of our Christian or Christian-like churches?
No,
All the time.
not at all.
Some fellowships become very political, don't they?
Yes.
And begin to, and what can we do to protect ourselves from that? What would we do to be careful not to be on this kind of a path like these Jewish people are, the religious people? How do we do that? What's the guardrails or the guidelines we can go by? Eve says scripture. Mm-hmm. We need to be careful that we are not putting in rules that aren't scriptural rules, right? We need to be careful what we're enforcing. Then how do we enforce things? If you don't follow our rule, we're going to have to crucify you. Is that what we do?
And then as I was reading recently, you have to put on the armor of God.
Mm-hmm. We need to pray. We need to put on the armor of God. We need to be in the Word. And we need to do what God has told us to do. And sometimes that does mean that we discipline members of our church. But we don't put them to death. No. And we're not mean. We don't need to be mean. If someone is different and wants to believe differently than what we see in Scripture and what we as a fellowship agree on, then we can invite them to go somewhere that they would feel more comfortable, right? Mm-hmm. Or we can just allow them to be with us, and maybe with time they'll learn. Should they be a leader?
No.
Should they be teaching?
No.
You have to be careful, right? Mm-hmm. Because if you're not careful, someone could influence people to do things that are wrong. It's a tricky thing. If you look at church history, we've made a lot of mistakes in regard to this.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. It's not our job to judge, but in a way, we do have to judge in terms of making decisions about whether something is okay to be a part of or not.
You need to point out Scripture in a loving way to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It can cause a lot of controversy in a church. So we have to be careful that we're real clear about what we stand for and what we believe. And then we try to help people, but we don't need to put them in certain positions that would make them, powerful in a way. But there have been a lot of church splits over that kind of thing, right? Mm-hmm. It
And
happens.
we really don't want to get ourselves, human here, get ourselves in the position where we would be persecuted or we'd be looked badly upon, we'd be ostracized from, whatever group that you are with or around.
So if you're a part of a fellowship, a church, and you're finding that church is saying things that are not scriptural, and they're teaching things that are not scriptural, and you feel like it's not a good fit, the Holy Spirit inside of you is going to be clanging bells, going, you're going to feel that sense that this isn't right. And then you have to make a decision. Can you change the course of the people that are there? Not likely, but maybe it's worth having a conversation with the pastor or the leadership, right, to see if there's a course correction that can be done. Or you may have to find a fellowship that's going to stay scriptural, stay with the Bible. Mm-hmm. Right? I don't know what other choices there are. Do you?
Sometimes you just have to walk away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Learn it on your own until you find the right place.
Yeah.
Pray.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, this is on this next slide, John 18:33. All four of the Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John all say the same thing about. Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews? Is that your own idea?" Jesus asked, "Or did others talk to you about me?" So Pilate's question, what he's asking is, are you a rebel? Are you someone who's trying to rebel? The question actually originated with the Jews, and what he doesn't realize he's saying is, are you the Messianic king? Because they know that he's not trying to be king of the Romans. So what do you mean? So the only king that the Jews talk about is the Messianic king. So that's what they're talking about. And Jesus, I feel like Jesus has kind of taken a little bit of humor here. Is that your own idea? Jesus asked. Do you think I'm king of the Jews? Going on in John, down to verse 35. Am I a Jew? Pilate replied. Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it you have done? Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place. So is that a reasonable reply? That seems like a really reasonable reply compared to how the Jews are making these accusations. Verse 37, you are a king then, said Pilate. Jesus answered, you say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. What is truth? Retorted Pilate. With this, he went out again to the Jews gathered there and said, I find now no basis for a charge against him. So in verse 36, Jesus agrees that he has a kingdom, but asserts that it's not the kind of kingdom that has soldiers to fight for it. It was not built, nor is it maintained by military might. Poor Pilate. So Pilate asks, are you the king of the Jews? His tone is one of incredulity. It's incredible. It's not scorn. Obviously, Jesus is not a king of anything, as far as Pilate can see. And then Jesus speaks of his kingdom being of another world. To which Pilate replies, again, with scorn, then you are a king of some other world. Imagine Pilate's frustration as Jesus begins speaking of truth, which prompts Pilate to counter with, what is truth? What is truth? Pilate may have been dismissive and meant, what does truth matter? Or he may have been serious and meant, it is not easy to find truth. What is it? Either way, it was clear to him that Jesus was no rebel. I find no basis for a charge against him. This is not going to make the Jewish people happy. So I'm going to go over to Mark now, Mark 15. Mark 15 and Matthew 27 cover the same thing. So Mark 15, verse 3. The chief priests accused him of many things. So again, Pilate asked him, aren't you going to answer? See how many things they are accusing you of? But Jesus still made no reply, and Pilate was amazed. So according to Luke 23, verse 2, Jesus was accused before Pilate of subverting the nation, opposing payment of taxes to Caesar, and claiming to be Messiah, a king. Multiple charges were common in criminal cases. In verse 4 of this Mark passage, aren't you going to answer? If Jesus made no defense, according to Roman law, Pilate would have to pronounce against him. So Pilate wants him to make a defense so that he gets him out of this problem. Isaiah 53:7 says, listen to what it says. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. That's one of those weird prophecies all the way back in Isaiah, that when the Jewish people when the Christians reflected on this, they're going, oh, look, that's just like that. That was prophesied in Isaiah chapter 53, verse 7. A sheep is known for being a very gentle, quiet animal that does not scream or fight when its wool is cut off by a shear. A sheep accepts the shearing process without panic or anger, just as Jesus accepted his harsh fate. Let's go on. There's a little blurb here in Luke 23, verse 5. But they insisted he stirs up the people all over Judea by his teaching. He started in Galilee and has come all the way here. He's been making trouble all over the place, and now he's here. So the way that this is said, it is referring to all the land, the whole land where the Jews are at, all over, not just Jerusalem. So it includes Galilee all the way to the southern section where you have the region of Judea proper, which was governed by Pilate. So they're saying he's just going all over the place. Everywhere there's Jewish people, he's making a problem. Okay, so that was the first appearance before the Roman procurator Pilate. Now the second is going to be the appearance before Herod Antipas, a native ruler of Galilee appointed by the Romans. So Pilate sends him to Antipas. Now we are in Jerusalem, Friday early morning. Luke records this passage, Luke 23, starting at verse 6. On hearing this, Pilate asked if the man was a Galilean. When he learned that Jesus was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at the time. Yeah, good idea. When Herod saw Jesus, he was greatly pleased because for a long time he had been wanting to see him. From what he had heard about him, he hoped to see him perform a sign of some sort. He plied him with many questions, but Jesus gave him no answer. The chief priests and the teachers of the law were standing there vehemently accusing him. Then Herod and his soldiers ridiculed and mocked him. Dressing him in an elegant robe, they sent him back to Pilate. That day, Herod and Pilate became friends. Before this, they had been enemies. So this Herod is Antipas. He ruled Galilee and Perea. Although Pilate and Herod were rivals, Pilate did not want to handle this case, so he sent Jesus to Herod. Herod's main headquarters was in Tiberias at the Sea of Galilee, but like Pilate, he had come to Jerusalem because of the crowds that were there for Passover. In verse 8, Herod may have been curious about what sort of person Jesus was. He may also have been concerned about Jesus' popularity, perhaps evidenced by the report of some Pharisees that Herod desired to kill him. It is unlikely that the two had ever met, and there is no record that Jesus ever preached in Tiberias, where Herod's residence was located. Luke is the only gospel writer who mentions this appearance before Herod Antipas. Note the elegant robe. We're going to see something about that later again. Okay, so he went before Antipas, and now he makes his final appearance before Pilate. This is the third dip now, the third opinion. Okay. Mark 15 and Matthew 27, there's just a couple verses here. Mark 15:6. Now it was the custom of the festival to release a prisoner whom the people requested. A man called Barabbas was in prison with the insurrectionists who had committed murder in the uprising. The crowd came up and asked Pilate to do for them what he usually did. Matthew 27, verse 15. Now it was the governor's custom at the festival to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. At that time, they had a well-known prisoner whose name was Jesus Barabbas. Did you know that? I didn't know that. I didn't know Barabbas whole name was Jesus Barabbas.
Does a Barabbas also mean kind
Son
of like
of the
son of
Father.
man or son of
Son
the
of the
father?
Father.
Son of the Father.
Yeah.
So in Matthew 27, many manuscripts do not have Jesus here. They just take it out because it gets confusing for the reader, because we're talking about Jesus of Nazareth and then Barabbas. So many of them don't put Jesus there. But also in verse 17, Barabbas had achieved notoriety by taking part in a rebellion, presumably against the Romans. So he would have been a folk hero among the Jews. Some manuscripts use Barabbas' full name, Jesus Barabbas. If that is the correct reading, it sharpens the point of Pilate's question. In verse 17, Pilate asked him, "Which one do you want me to release to you? Jesus Barabbas, which means son of the Father, or Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" Now that's a confusing question. If you think about it, who is the Son of God, or the man whose name means son of the Father? Merlin, this is getting messy down here. I don't know. This is getting messy down here. I can see why the Pilate and Herod would be going, what? So back to Luke 23, verse 13. Pilate called together the chief priests, the rulers, and the people, and said to them, "You brought me this man as one who was inciting the people to rebellion. I have examined him in your presence and have found no basis for your charges against him. Neither has Herod, for he sent him back to us. As you can see, he's done nothing to deserve death." If we continue on in that Luke passage, "Therefore I will punish him, then release him," is what that goes on to say. But Matthew has another, in Matthew 27, "So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked him, 'Which one do you want me to release to you, Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who is called the Messiah?' For he knew it was out of self-interest that they had handed Jesus over to him. While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him a message." Oh my goodness.
Get a little messy.
"Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him." But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus executed. "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" asked the governor. "Barabbas," they answered. John has a comment here, "But it is your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at the time of the Passover. Do you want me to release the King of the Jews?" So in verse 19 Mark also puts down, "But the chief priest stirred up the crowd." That was interesting. That, so you see all these angles of people trying to manipulate what's happening here. In the Matthew passage, verse 19, Matthew's the only writer who records the Pilate's wife note, which adds another positive Gentile portrayal to his. In other words, Matthew shows how women cared for him, these people that were on the outline, and here's Pilate's wife, a positive role that she was trying to play in this narrative. So it's kind of interesting. Now, we saw on the previous passage, we saw that Jesus got beat up, right? So there's kind of some question about how many times Jesus got beat up. How many times did he have a thorn put on his crown? How many times was he hit with the thing? So there's some, we're not sure if they've just put things in a different order, so it seems like a different time, or if there were multiple times that he was beaten. So in Luke 23, verse 18, "But the whole crowd shouted, 'Away with this man! Release Barabbas to us!' Barabbas had been thrown into prison for an insurrection in the city and for murder." And now John gives us a lengthy passage, John chapter 18, verse 40. "They shouted back, 'No, not him, give us Barabbas.' Now Barabbas had taken part in an uprising." Then chapter 19, "Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged." So is this the same flogging from before, or is this a second flogging? "The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went," remember the robe from the previous? Mm-hmm. "They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, 'Hail, King of the Jews,' and they slapped him in the face." Now, the last beat up, there was no crown of thorns, I don't think, mentioned. "Once more Pilate came out and said to the Jews gathered there, 'Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him.' When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, 'Here is the man.'" So what's Pilate trying to do?
Appease the crowd.
Trying to keep from getting to the whole point of crucifixion, right? Trying to say, okay, we beat him up, whatever, I don't see any charges against him. He's trying to appease the crowd. So in this John passage, verse 1, there's another thing. It talks about the flogging. And here's what a Roman flagrum looks like. It's a whip that has several leather thongs embedded with lead, shot, and bone. Jewish law limited a flogging to 39 lashes. Roman law did not. Jesus was beaten nearly to death, which accounts for his expiring pretty quickly on the cross. Evidence of over 100 lashes can be seen on the Shroud of Turin. Well, that would also support the idea that he was beaten twice. Because if he'd had 39 lashes twice, that would be so. Pilate found Jesus not guilty as charged. He was willing to have him illegally beaten in order to satisfy the chief priests and the people and to warn against any possible trouble in the future. Scourging, though not intended to kill, was sometimes fatal, especially if you get it done twice. So the chief priests and the guards called for crucifixion. Pilate found no guilt but had him flogged. Jews said he made himself the Son of God, and according to their law, he must die. Jesus committed blasphemy under the law, according to them. Oh, if they'd only known he actually was the king of it all, not just the Jews. He actually was clearly true. Scholars debate whether Jesus was flogged once or twice, with some interpreting John 19:1 as an initial judicial punishment before Pilate's final death sentence, and subsequent scourging recorded in Matthew 27:26 and Mark 15:15. Other scholars view the gospel accounts as describing the same single event from different narrative viewpoints. John 19:1, Pilate takes Jesus and has him flogged prior to presenting him to the crowd and deciding on the crucifixion. Matthew 27:26 and Mark 15:15, Pilate has Jesus scourged immediately after releasing Barabbas and formally sentencing him to be crucified. And Luke 23:16 and verse 22, Pilate states he will punish or chastise Jesus and release him, which some scholars connect to the first beating. So the two flogging view, proponents argue Pilate initially flogged Jesus as an alternative to crucifixion to appease the crowd, but later ordered a second mandatory scourging as part of the formal execution process. The single flogging view is that other scholars argue that the Gospels are just placing the mention of the single Roman scourging at different points in the narrative timeline relative to the final sentencing, meaning Jesus was only whipped once. Does it matter? It mattered to Jesus. It mattered. One of the things that would be the advantage to having been beat up so much before is that his time on the cross would be shorter because he was close to death. So close to death he couldn't carry his own.
There's another Jewish thought that it wasn't twice because, you know how they wouldn't go into the praetorium because they were Jews. So they wanted to be able to be under the law by not letting them be scourged more than they're supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no proof to that.
Right.
Another thought behind it.
The reason I really want to talk about it, or the reason I'm mentioning it, because like I normally would just say, you got flogged, so go on. Let's get to the meaningful part. But sometimes people say that Scripture contradicts itself or whatever. So I want to give you the fuel to be able to have that conversation with someone about was he flogged once or flogged twice? You can say, well, we're not sure. It could have been once, it could have been twice. It was bad news either way. Okay, so then we go on. Let's go. This passage, all four of them say this passage. Mark says the same thing as Matthew does. So I'll read Matthew, Luke, and then John, okay? They're reading the same. What shall I do then with Jesus, who is called the Messiah? Pilate asked. They all answered, crucify him. Why? What crime has he committed? Asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, crucify him. In Luke, wanting to release Jesus, Pilate appealed to them again, but they kept shouting, crucify him, crucify him. For the third time he spoke to them, Why? What crime has this man committed? I found in him no grounds for the death penalty. Therefore, I will have him punished and then release him. Then John, as soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, "Crucify, crucify." But Pilate answered, "You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him." I think, and that would be the way I would answer you. The Jewish leaders insisted, "We have a law, and according to that law, he must die because he claimed to be the Son of God."
See, that's a contradiction, if you think about it. Because they're telling Pilate it's against the law for them to put him to death, but then right there, they're saying they have a law, and he has to be put to death because he's coming to be the Son of God.
The Jews
So
have two
blasphemy.
laws they're living under. They've got the law of Judaism, but also the Romans had laws about what they could do, where their authority broke off.
Jews couldn't kill anyone.
They were not
That was
allowed
against
by
Roman law.
Roman law.
So if they did
That's
that,
right.
they would be killed.
They had two sets of laws, and it gets very confusing because they talk about the law, but you're talking about two. Yeah.
That makes sense, okay.
Yeah. Good question. I think it's always good to have questions because we can make sure we're straight, right? Okay, let's keep going to John. John chapter 19, verse 8. When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid, and he went back inside the palace. "Where do you come from?" he asked Jesus. But Jesus gave him no answer. "Do you refuse to speak to me?" Pilate said. "Don't you realize I have power either to free you or to crucify you?" Jesus answered, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." What is he giving Pilate an out there? "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above." What's Jesus saying there?
You're a pawn.
Yeah.
God is allowing this to happen. God is allowing this to happen. He could step in at any moment. I think Jesus is talking about God. Says
They
you
have
would
to fulfill prophecy.
right. He understands that, but they don't understand that. "Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free. That you should probably underline that or something, because we often think of Pilate as a bad guy. But he tried to set Jesus free. But the Jewish leaders kept shouting, "If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar."
Oh, boy.
Like they care about something.
When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judge's seat at a place known as the Stone Pavement, which in Aramaic is Gabbatha. It was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about noon. "Here is your king," Pilate said to the Jews. He's all beat up and bloodied with the crown of thorns. So Pilate is governor of Judea, not Galilee. He could send Jesus to Herod, who rules over Galilee. Luke tells us it doesn't work. Herod sends him back. Pilate has done everything possible to have Jesus released. Jesus has not broken any Roman law. Nevertheless, the crowd is extremely volatile, growing more and more agitated, about to ignite. In John 11:50, Caiaphas proclaimed in no uncertain terms that it is more expedient that one man die than the whole nation perish. That is what's at stake here, and Pilate knows it. Thus he acquiesces to the crowd and hands Jesus over to them. What happened to Pilate? Josephus tells us he was sent back to Rome and exiled to Gaul, where he committed suicide. Pilate did not have a happy ending.
And his wife says, "I told you."
She remarried another king or something. So the next section, Matthew, Luke, and John, all say it a little bit uniquely, so I kept all three. Matthew 27, verse 24. When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. I am innocent of this man's blood, he said. It is your responsibility. All of the people answered, his blood is on us and on our children. Boy, they spoke truth there, didn't they? Luke put, but with loud shouts, they insistently demanded that he be crucified, and their shouts prevailed. John describes it this way, but they shouted, take him away, crucify him. Shall I crucify your king? Pilate asked. We have no king but Caesar, the chief priests answered. I'm surprised God didn't make them choke on that. Have no king but Caesar. Pilate had already handed Jesus over to the soldiers for scourging before he was convicted. He now handed him over for crucifixion. In John 19:15, we have no king but Caesar. Talk about irony. They rejected any suggestion that they were rebels against Rome, but make a statement of allegiance that no Jew should be guilty of. But we have no king but Caesar. I bet they regretted that later upon reflection. When it's convenient.
About 3 days.
Convenience. That is true,
Started
Merlin,
showing
isn't it?
up.
That is true. Okay, Luke has the main part here. They all four say the similar thing, but Luke 23, verse 24. So Pilate decided to grant their demand. He released the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, the one they asked for, and surrendered Jesus to their will. Mark adds, wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them. Barabbas was a first-century Jewish prisoner who was freed by Pontius Pilate instead of Jesus Christ. The 4 New Testament Gospels describe him as a notorious criminal, a rebel, and a murderer involved in an uprising in Jerusalem, described as a rebel and a robber or bandit who committed murder during an anti-Roman insurrection. So the Persians introduced crucifixion as a capital punishment as early as the 6th century BC. And the Carthaginians, Macedonians, and Romans employed it until Emperor Constantine outlawed crucifixion in AD 337 out of deference to Christ. So this was before even the time of Christ, 6th century BC, all the way to 337 AD. The Greeks had an aversion to crucifixion, although the historian Herodotus tells of the crucifixion of the Persian general Artaxerxes, who commanded forces in the Second Persian invasion of Greece under Xerxes. That's a central character in the book of Esther. We read about Xerxes, right? So the Greeks did not like crucifixion. The Romans used crucifixion frequently, however. Crassus, the Roman general who defeated Spartacus in the slave revolt of 73 to 71 BC, crucified 6,000 captive slaves, lining the Via Appia with them. And the historian Tacitus tells us that during the siege of Jerusalem in AD 70, no fewer than 600,000 Jews fought the Romans, and those captured were crucified up to 500 a day. Now, I was trying to remember where I had seen or heard about this, but was it in Chosen? Did they show people hanging along the streets?
Yes, and they used them, they lit them on fire and used them to light those streets so people could see what would happen.
And this didn't just happen like during Jesus' time. This is happening for a major period of time where they used crucifixion to say, if you disagree with us, you'll end up on a pole, that kind of thing. So this is the Appian Way. It's 117 miles from Rome to Capua. Exactly 6,000 surviving rebel slaves were crucified along the Appian Way. This mass execution took place in 71 BC. 71 BC, before Christ, on the orders of the Roman general Marcus Licinius Crassus, after the defeat of the slave revolt led by Spartacus. The Appian Way, which is the Via Appia, is one of ancient Rome's earliest and most strategic highways, begun in 312 BC by the censor Appius Claudius Cacus. Just in case you wanted to know. So make sure and tell your husband that you missed about Cacus, honey.
Names.
It stretched over 350 miles from Rome to Brindisi, serving as a vital military and trade route to Greece and to the east. This is the kind of thing you would see. See how, and this is a painting, but you can see how it's along the roadway, and you can see in the distance how it's just following a path. So here you are just trying to travel to a city, and meanwhile you're having to pass. Wouldn't that be just awful? So gruesome.
Stay at home.
Yeah. So usually the crucifixion was a prolonged process. They would be nailed to a cross with tapered iron spikes. Generally, it took 3 or more days to die. Jesus died in a matter of hours because he had been beaten nearly to death by the flogging, probably multiple floggings. So the Roman soldiers mock Jesus Friday between 6 and 9 a.m. So is this the third beating? Matthew 27 says, 27:27. Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. Why the robe? What does a scarlet robe represent? Or a purple robe could be?
Royalty.
Royalty. Because he's saying he's the king of the Jews, so they put the robe on him. They put a staff in his right hand, then they knelt in front of him and mocked him. Hail, King of the Jews, they said. They spit on him and took the staff and struck him on the head again and again. So the praetorium, the word was originally used for a general's tent or the headquarters of a military camp. The soldiers quartered in the praetorium were recruited from non-Jewish inhabitants of the Holy Land and assigned to the military governor. Both robe and crown were parts of the mock royal attire that they placed on Jesus. Notice instead of Hail Caesar, Hail King of the Jews is what they were saying. They spit on him. A parody on the kiss of homage. In other words, we're not going to kiss you, we're going to spit on you, your royalty. Isaiah 50, verse 6 says, Isaiah 50, verse 6, Old Testament, I offered my back to those who beat me, my cheeks to those who pulled out my beard. I did not hide my face from mocking and spitting. Earlier, the Sanhedrin had mocked Jesus. Now the Roman soldiers do. Here's a picture of the, have you heard of the Via Dolorosa? It's a song, isn't it a song? Who did that song?
Who, what?
Who did that song?
Oh,
What
quite a few people.
did
And the Via
Johnny Cash do it?
Dolorosa.
Somebody famous
On the way
did.
of suffering.
Yeah.
That's what it means, Via Dolorosa, the way of suffering.
This is a picture of the Via Dolorosa in Jerusalem and a sign that's along the way. It's Latin. It means way of sorrow. It's 600 meters, like 0.2 miles street in Old Jerusalem, according to the canonical Gospels. The Via Dolorosa is not one street, but a route consisting of segments of several streets. Tradition holds that it is the path Jesus walked, carrying the cross from his condemnation by Pontius Pilate to his crucifixion on the hill of Golgotha. So if it says that tradition holds, what does that mean?
Is that?
That says that tradition holds. In other words, maybe, maybe not. Don't get into an argument with someone. If someone wants to argue about that road or where they went, that's, don't get down that path. Because Eve, did you visit that when you went to Jerusalem?
Yeah, we
Well-
walked that road.
What was it like?
I don't think I have a word at the moment to express, but it was.
It looked like an average everyday road.
No, it's not. And the thing about it is that you had, I guess it's a Catholic thing, but they were, and matter of fact, John Morgan got a hold of it.
14 stations of the cross.
Yes, and so once I found that out, it was like you were watching for those. Some of them were close together, but you have all this bustling and vendors and all that other kind of stuff here where Jesus walked. On his way to the cross, and it just talking about conflicting.
That's one of the reasons I'm not really interested in going to Old Jerusalem. There are places I'd be interested in seeing, but I feel like so much has been, I'm going to show you some slides of pictures of that later, but where things have been built over the top of it and used. It's all so defiled, so to
Yeah.
speak.
But it's
Could be
nice
this,
that they have
could be
those markers. and
The Stations of the Cross?
Yes, the
Mhm.
stations, and it tells you what it is, and, you know, you can blot out everything else and, you know, take a moment and
Yeah.
realize where you really are.
I don't know if we'll get there tonight, but I do have some pictures of the things that have been built on top of. Like this is here, but then this is built on top of it, and that's on top of that. So, we'll show that. Okay, Mark 15:20. And when they had mocked him, they took off the purple robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him out to crucify him. No use in using up the robe. Matthew says the same thing. John adds, so the soldiers took charge of Jesus, carrying his own cross. So in Psalm 22, verse 6, it says, but I am a worm, not a man, scorned by everyone, despised by the people. All who see me mock me. They hurl insults, shaking their heads. That's in Psalms. Isaiah 50, verse 6. I offered my back to those who beat me, my cheeks to those who pulled out my beard. I did not hide my face from mocking and spitting. As he moves along, Luke 23, verse 26, as the soldiers led him away, they seized Simon from Cyrene, who was on his way in from the country, and put the cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus. In Mark, it also adds that Simon Cyrene was the father of Alexander and Rufus. You have the names of his boys. And they forced him to carry the cross. It wasn't like he volunteered, but they forced him to. So Simon, his sons, Rufus and Alexander, must have been known in Christian circles at a later time, and perhaps were associated with the church in Rome. Cyrene is a leading city in modern Tripoli or Libya, west of Egypt. So many people assumed that he was a black man. He was at least considered a foreign nationality.
I was just watching, I can't remember all of it, it was on YouTube. Why did a black man have to carry the cross? And I got interrupted when I was watching it. I forgot to find it.
Yeah.
They have some-
Have things changed much where there are certain ethnic groups that other ethnic groups pick on? You know, because the Jews are not like white people, and he was from Libya, maybe, or Egypt. He might have been darker skinned, but you know, we haven't changed that much. We still really pick on people based on race or income or status, right? You still do that.
Well, I
So
thought when I got to Israel that I was gonna just be able to be friendly American and say shalom to everybody that I met. I said, no, I don't think that's the case because it's such a melting pot of people over there. You don't know who you're talking to.
right, and at Passover you would have a lot of people from all over the place.
Yeah.
So I don't know that they chose a black man. They may have just chosen someone they didn't know that looked strong and could carry it and say, hey, you carry it. You know, and-
Cyrene is modern day Libya,
right.
so didn't
Trip-
mean he had to be
Tripoli.
black.
hmm
Didn't
West
have
of
to be
Egypt.
black.
Right, west of Egypt. A lot of people assume that,
Mhm.
but we don't really know.
He was out of town, he was close by.
Okay, guys, we're at 7:00. So shall we just stop right here and start next time?
Okay.
We'll keep moving forward. So, what do you think? What would you have done if you were in that time and this was something you were seeing happen? What would you have done? I feel like I'm an old lady. Like, what am I gonna do? Beat somebody with my cane? Get your hands off of him.
Well, you have to understand that we wouldn't have known what we know now, so we probably wouldn't have done anything different. The disciples were gone.
They were in the city, though, right?
I mean, they were there to help him, you know.
But how could they help?
Yeah. Some of the women followed, but they couldn't do anything. He just said, cry for, weep over your own children because, this is going to happen.
The other thing is, Jesus had been telling the disciples about this stuff, about the things that were going to happen.
Going to happen.
We saw several places in the scripture where he took them aside and talked to them about things that were coming. And they didn't like it, they didn't understand it, But don't you think as they see it happen, they are understanding it and realizing this is going to happen? Do you,
They were afraid.
I bet they were afraid. And don't you think Jesus told them that he was going to be rising from the dead? That there was going to be a resurrection? So if okay, we're sitting around this group like this, right? And let's say we meet every week and we know each other, which is so close. Okay? And you tell me something that's bad that's going to happen to you, and you know what's going to happen and it's going to result in good. So then do I try to interfere? What do I do? You told me that this was bad that's going to happen. You told me that it's going to turn out for good. What am I supposed to do?
Kind of hard question to answer anyway.
Which is
Because
where
you'd want to stop the bad from happening, but yet, are you gonna be afraid to stop the bad from happening?
Jesus has told them, this is what's going to happen, and it's going to be hard. And you know, he was in the Gethsemane. He was at the Lord's table. We saw places where he took them aside and talked with them about what was coming up. So they knew what was going to happen.
And
They,
then when he takes them aside and he tells them what's gonna happen, they ask questions about the stupidest things.
Yeah.
that we just
Well,
said.
they didn't get it until after the resurrection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They just didn't.
So even though he mentioned that he'd rise, they didn't really know what it meant.
no.
Not really.
And what could they do?
Well, yeah. Even, you know, his mother and some of the other, I mean, he had a very small support system. They
Yeah.
just ran away or hid or whatever. You know, they were afraid of the Romans. The
Okay,
Jews,
so
too.
God has told us some things are going to happen at the end of time.
Mhm.
Any of those things worry you?
Nope.
And what did you say?
Do any of those things worry you
No.
about what's going to happen at the end of time? Why?
Because we won't be here.
I'm planning to rapture. I'm all for a pre-trib rapture.
That's right.
I put my vote in for pre-trib rapture. If that is correct, then we won't be here for the tribulation. But will things be hard before the tribulation?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
They already are getting harder and harder. We can see the signs. And if we understand the prophecy, we can also see the different nations and the things coming. It gets kind of scary, doesn't it? And then what about the people you know who do not have a saving knowledge of Christ?
You can only keep praying.
We can try to talk with them, but my heart aches for those individuals that I know don't have a saving knowledge of Christ. And when we rapture, that'll be it. Then they may know because we tried to tell them, right, what was going to happen. But we'll be kind of like the disciples or the apostles. We are like that now. We can see what's coming and that it's coming very soon. And they ought to be prepared to do it. And we know people who are not ready.
Oh, yes.
And the way that they're doing it for our time, it's like they're blaming